All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going through a series of video presentations based on one of our textbooks for the Rankin Technical College AWD Application and Web Development 1000 Web Development Technologies class. The book is Murox JavaScript and jQuery 3rd edition. In the actual classroom, we went over all of Section 1 in the book. And Section 1 was the first 7 chapters. Then we went over Section 2, which was the next 5 chapters. All right. And I have since done lectures for Section 3, which we did not go over in class, in chapters 13, 14, 15, 16. Now I'm going to jump into Chapter 17 and talk about how to create and use your own objects. Tomorrow, hopefully, I will finish up by going through Chapter 18, which is how to create and use closures, IIFEs, the module pattern, and plugins. But for now, as mentioned, it's objects. We've looked at objects, started to look at them in Chapter 4, but now it's how to make your own objects. So as the author quite often does in here, you'll see that they will talk about something, and then they will give you an application. Talk about something and give you an application. Talk about something and give you an application. So they're going to basically go back and do some of the applications they've done previously, but redo them using JavaScript objects. All right? So JavaScript, as it says, has a flat hierarchy of native object types. I want to put something or say something here, and this is my verbiage. Not everybody will probably agree with this. I don't know if Mr. Gudmested will agree with this or not, but I look at languages as being basically 3 types. First, you have procedural languages. In fact, let me just put it up here. I don't want to get off on too big of a tangent, but I do want to show you this. All right? So first, you have procedural programming languages. And they are non-object oriented. All right? So they don't allow you to create classes and objects. Okay? Then you've got languages like Java, C# that are object oriented programming, or OOP languages. All right? These languages do allow you to create objects, classes, etc. Not only do they allow you to do that, you must do that. In Java or in C#, just writing hello world on the screen involves the use of a class. So not only do they allow you, you must create objects, classes, etc. All right, so again, examples are Java and C#. All right, then you have, I'm just going to make a copy here, what I like to call object-based programming language. There is no OBP, but I'll put it there anyway. All right? They do allow you to. You do not have to create objects, classes, etc. Examples of these are JavaScript and PHP. What that means is JavaScript has object-oriented programming capabilities which you may or may not choose to take advantage of. We've gone through the first 16 of 18 chapters in this book and done almost nothing with object orientation, and our programs have worked just fine. So when they talk about this flat thing, this is what JavaScript has. We've talked strings, numbers, booleans, dates, and arrays. Then there's functions, which is basically our own type. We've even done some work with that stuff. All right. So they talk about that in here, probably better than I just did. But if you notice in the description here, JavaScript provides a two-level hierarchy of object types. The top level consists of the object type. Since that's at the top, what that means is object is the parent of all of these. All right, or they're all children of object, however you want to say it. So, because of that, object's at the top, and then the next thing is string, number, date, array, function, etc. Those all automatically inherit every property and every method of the object type without doing anything special. They can also provide their own properties and methods. As the author says here, when you create a variable with a literal value, JavaScript converts it to the corresponding native object type. All right, so in other words, if we look at this, I don't know why you'd ever want to do this, but you could say instead of var last name equal double quote hopper double quote, you could basically set it up and say that it equaled, I don't know, like new string, and then in parentheses double quote hopper double quote. All right, because that's what happens behind the scenes. The only time you have to actually use the word new when you're creating this is for a date object, and that's just because of the way that object is constructed. So when you start to do your own, look at this. What we're doing in here is this is creating a brand new object called invoice. Notice that the values are inside of curly braces. This particular object has in it just one property. It's called tax rate, and it's got a value. Notice it's colon, not equals. So it's got a tax rate of 8.75%. Here, we're creating an object, and all it has in it is a method. Well, typically, you wouldn't have an object with just data in it, or properties. You very well may or may not have an object with just methods in it, but quite often you'll do something like this, where we're combining 1 and 2. And we are creating a new object that has both properties and methods. All right? And the way that we refer to what's inside of here is we would say invoice.taxRate if we wanted to refer to the tax rate, or if we wanted to call the get sales tax, we'd say invoice.getSalesTax. All right, and we need to pass it in a value. It is also possible to nest or put one type of object inside of another one. So here is an invoice object that has a terms object inside of it. So notice we need to say invoice.terms.tax rate or .due days. So when you create an object with a literal value, that's known as an object literal. As it says, you can add properties to it. When a property name is paired with a function, it's called a method. So what a method is just a function that's been declared inside of an object. Inside the method, you typically use the word this, which is a keyword, and the word, and the word this that you use here refers to whatever the currently active thing is. We'll talk more about it later. And again, as mentioned, you can nest one object inside of another object. All right. After you create an object, you can extend it by adding additional properties and methods to it. Now, the way this is typically done in object-oriented programming languages such as Java or C# is you use what's called inheritance, when you've got a new object that inherits from a previous object. Not really done that way here. In fact, if you look here, here's an example. We create a new object called invoice, then we just give it a property, and then we come in and we give it a method. It's totally fine to do that. We can modify, so if the tax rate goes up from 8.75 to 9.5%, we just make that change. We can remove properties from objects, all right, if we have to, need to, want to. Two variables can refer to the same object, all right. So as the author says, and you're probably going to get more from just looking at the examples on the right-hand page and then reading the kind of summarized description at the bottom of each one of the pages. So as the author says here, once an object is created, you can assign new properties and methods to it. Just mention that. To remove a property or method, you use the delete operator. Now here's the key thing. A variable or property holds a reference to the object, not the object itself. In other programming languages, they typically refer to that as being a pointer. So in other words, the variable or property doesn't hold the object, it holds the address to where the beginning address of where the object lives in memory. All right? All right. A library. A library is a file or group of related functions. Once you start going, we've used some third-party libraries. We've used jQuery. We've talked about jQuery UI. But you can write your own library. So if you're constantly doing sorting, let's say, you might want to write some customized sort functions and put them into your own library. The author mentions here a couple paragraphs down, one of the main benefits of libraries is code reuse. I mean, think about an actual library that has books. What's one of the biggest advantages of that kind of a library? And the answer is that it can hold books that people can borrow and use. All right? Another benefit, as it says, is it allows you to keep your JavaScript files smaller, because you can take all that stuff, the intricate parts, and push them all to libraries. Finally, organizing your code in libraries encourages you to group code together that has similar functionality. What we have done so far is we have basically had our HTML, and then we've created a JS folder for our JavaScript files, and we've created a CSS folder for our CSS files. Now, sometimes we've had a project where the files that are in there, the JavaScript files, have been similar, but rather than creating one big library and putting all those functions in that file, we typically, or at least I have and my class has, created a number of JavaScript files when you don't have to do that. So again, here's the benefits. I like the example that they show here. You may or may not. Notice they've created a file called library_mpg.js. And what does it hold there? It holds a miles per gallon object that has a miles property, it has a gallons property, and it has a calculate function or calculate method, which just will return the miles divided by the gallons, similar to what we've done before. Now notice, not only are we including jQuery and anything else, but underneath that, now we are including our library. You don't have to start it with library, but by doing that, you're really letting the user know exactly what it is, and you can put this whole file into your JS folder. Then you've got your folder. Make sure you put them in this order. And then notice that once you've included those, you're able to just say in here, mpg dot miles or dot gallons or dot calculate. So as mentioned here, as mentioned here on the bottom of the page, a JavaScript library is an external file that contains functions, objects, or typically both. JavaScript libraries can be very simple to very complex. You know the complex one because the complex library, the third-party jQuery library, is one we've been using for quite a while. A JavaScript library is normal JavaScript. You create the library by grouping related functions and objects together in a simple file. The author encourages you to name your JavaScript libraries so it's clear what they do. So library underscore and then what it does. You include JavaScript libraries in your application by using simple script elements, as we just looked at. So the author goes back here and rewrites the miles per gallon program. We've written this umpteen times ourselves. What's new? Well, after jQuery, we now are including that library file and then our main file. Notice we're giving IDs to miles to gallons, okay, and to miles per gallon. We are associating the buttons with IDs. So we're giving IDs to our data and to our buttons. And as the author mentions here, this application is an updated version of the application we built way back in Chapter 4. It accepts a number of miles per gallon and a number of gallons used. All right? It links to the jQuery library and then to our own library. Since the main JavaScript file depends both on jQuery and our library, it's coded last. So the actual JavaScript for this is shown right here. Now it's a little more extensive than the first stuff we saw. Why? Because what you'll notice is in the MPG, we're now doing validation. We are checking only for two things. We are checking to make sure that the values we put in for miles and for gallons are both numeric and that they're both positive. We could add constants in here where maybe, because what I've done in my classes is I've said the most miles you can drive at a time is 1,000, the most gallons you can use at a time is 100. All right, but we don't have to do that. Then in our main file, notice what we're doing. We've also got, we named our function here isValid. That's our validation function. And we only will do the calculate if isValid is set to true. So it's very, very, very similar to what we've done before, except we're extending it via the use of a library file. They also do mention in here, and I should add it to you, notice the word this. It's all over the place in here. And as the author says here, these methods use the word this to refer to the miles and gallons properties. All right. Next, how to create and call constructors. What a constructor is it's a special kind of method, not really function like they say, but it's a special kind of method that gets called when you create an object. And quite often, a constructor is used so that you can initialize. All right, so that you can initialize your object. Now you'll notice it's possible to create here, this is our constructor. It has no parameters and it just does some stuff, or we can give it parameters. Make sure that if you do it like this, you say this dot subtotal equals subtotal, or this dot tax rate equal tax rate. Don't say subtotal equals subtotal. System won't know which one you're talking about. This will mean this is the object variable. This is what gets passed into the object variable. JavaScript is very unique, even more, well, it's more unique than any other language I know, because notice it says that you can add methods after you've created the object already by using what's called a prototype. All right? So, if you want to be able to create multiple instances of your own objects, you can code a constructor. Just like, if I create a person object, I can create a Jeff object, I can create a Sandy object, a Taylor object, a Mackenzie object, a Chloe object, etc. Those are the members of my family. All right? They'd all would have the same kinds of features. They would all have a height, a weight, a gender, an eye color, a hair color, etc. But they could all and would all be different. If the constructor has parameters, as it says, you pass the data that's going to be, you'll have to pass it in something. Again, here's the key one. You code the methods for a constructor on the prototype object of the object type. That way, all the instances are created by the constructor function. They all share the same methods. Not the values of those methods, but the same methods. This keeps duplicate definitions of the method out of memory. And they give you some syntax here. Typically, they start with uppercase. Okay. Other things you should know about prototypes. Let's go back. Let's go down to the bottom, and then we can go back up and look at the examples. Many programming languages use classes to create objects. JavaScript does not. They use prototype objects that you copy or clone, that's the way it's referred to create new objects. This kind of language is called classless or prototypal. I think that's how you pronounce it. When you create a new object, it's cloned from the prototype object, and it automatically inherits everything that's been set up for that prototype. When you add a method to a prototype object, that method is then available to all instances. So let's say that I had, for example, I created a person object, and I gave it those properties I mentioned before: a height, a weight, an eye color, a hair color, a gender, those 5 things. And I also gave it an eat and a drink method. So you could eat things and you could drink things. And later I come up and I say, you know what? I should also give you a sleep method. So when you're tired, you can sleep. So I could add that later. When you add a property or method to an instance, not of an object type, not to the object type itself, it's created directly on the instance, not on the prototype. So it's only available for that instance. That's called a direct or an own property. You can also use your own properties to override methods, but it's only overridden for that type. So let's assume, for example, that I create a sleep property and I pass it in a number. It's called hours, a variable called hours. But later somebody else decides, you know what, I want to pass in 2 values, one for hours and one for minutes. They can go in and override that then. And again, there are some, oops, oh boy. There are some examples of that in here. Creating 2 instances of a date object, adding a method to the prototype object for date, and then adding it just to an instance. If you add something to the main part of the object, the actual object itself, and not an instance, then it's available for all. If you add it just for an instance, it's only available for that instance. So what we have next is our miles per gallon, but we're adding our destination in here. All right? So we're saying that we went from, let's say, from Wentzville, Missouri to Seaside, California, wherever that is. We drove 75 miles and we used 3.2 gallons of gas. So we can see how many miles it is and how much gas we used. We can also figure out our MPG. So it's similar to what we had before, but as we are using a text area in here, every time we're doing this, we're adding a new trip object. So we had a Seattle trip object, a San Francisco trip object, a Seaside trip object. Not only that, we're adding them all together and getting our cumulative MPG. We could also get our cumulative miles if we wanted to do that, and our cumulative gallons of gas used. All right. So they show you that here. Everything that's new, again, is in yellow. Notice, basically, it's including the libraries, and it's putting IDs on everything, and a very little bit of new CSS. All right. As it says, this application calculates and stores the miles per gallon for 1 or more trips. It uses a constructor function to add a trip object type, which contains the methods needed to validate a trip, calculates the miles per gallon, and displays the information. That code is in a separate library. And the application stores instances of trip objects in an array. Another nice thing about JavaScript. You've heard this in earlier chapters. And that is that you can take your array and you can add to it, all right, you can add to it as the program's running. So again, notice what we have here. This is our trips file. Here, we're creating our trips object. Each one will have a destination, a miles, and a gallons passed in. We've got a validation function that we're adding here that says if the validation is empty or not a number, the destination is empty, or the miles is not numeric, or the gallons is not numeric, return false. If the miles or the gallons is less than 0, return false. Otherwise, return true. So again, we're only going to want to calculate the MPG if this succeeds. And we also add here, so we're with a prototype, we're adding their calculate, and we're adding our toString. Then we come in our main file, and we, this is our main JavaScript file. So that would be the one, they show that in here. Oh, that's on the previous page. It would be the last one that we add, and we're creating a trip array. And every time we come in here and we add a new destination, this is the code that's going to run then. All right, let's see. I'm at 26 minutes. I normally don't like these to be more than one lecture, but since I'm only halfway through, I'm going to stop right now, pick it up on how to create a factory function in just a moment.